much for joining, everyone. This is I think it's our third webinar in a series of our self-build series. Really a series to help you get started on your self-build journey. So today we're covering how to look for a plot, where to look for a plot, and all the things that you need to be thinking about when you're purchasing a plot and identifying land to build on. So I'm Fraser, I'm the Associate Director of HebHomes, and I'm joined by Alasdair Stephen, who's the Managing Director, and Jennifer Campbell, who's an Associate at DM Hall. So Jennifer's kindly joined us. She's a Chartered Surveyor and Associate, and she heads up the team in Bridge of Allen, and they cover Scotland and Cumbria. So Jennifer's worked in rural property sales for quite a few years, providing expertise in all aspects of buying and selling plots, farms, small holdings, strategic land opportunities, and has also been involved in the whisky and commercial farming sector for many years. So thank you very much for joining, Jennifer. Sorry, Jennifer, you're muted.
I said I'm just delighted that we got over the technical hitch. Very pleased to join you this morning.
It happens, but I'm glad we did. We managed to get through it.
And Fraser, hi, I'm Alasdair, and Fraser, would you be able to fix the slides so that we see the whole slide rather than seeing the bar down the left?
Yes, I will do. I'll just finish the intro, then I'll full screen the slides. So as I say, we're looking at how and where to look for your dream plot of land. We're going to go through how and where to look for them, and the process of offering a plot. We're also going to look at understanding where you're building and all the things that you need to think about when you're buying a plot. So all the considerations, also things like site surveys and drainage solutions, and finally connecting to services. So there will be a Q&A. So we'll be answering your questions at the end of the webinar. So if you add your questions to the chat or the Q&A section of the call, the session is going to be recorded. So if you keep your mics and cameras off, so they will automatically be off. And we'll upload it to YouTube as well as upload it to the website, so you'll be able to watch it back as well. So Jennifer's going to start us off with where and how to look for plots. So I'm just going to full screen this, and Jennifer, you can take it away.
Good afternoon to you all. I'll just run through some basic points, but I think there's not a sort of one-stroke approach to this, and hopefully we'll cover all bases. I think the important thing is once you've decided upon a location, it's quite an easy task to target the local estate agents in that area, and also chartered surveyors in that area. And there's a directory on RICS to find local agents who might be giving advice to landowners. Websites that advertise plots need to be legislatively and correctly registered, so they should be members of a redress scheme, because all agents apply to the national trading standards and should be registered with a redress scheme. And you can check that through Rightmove and also through HMRC. Be wary of multiple websites advertising land and plots for sale that may not be legitimate. And the main rural agencies in Scotland are ourselves, obviously, and we cover Scotland and Cumbria. If you're looking in Dumfriesshire, Three Rural are very active in the area. Galbraith are also in Scotland and Cumbria. Bellingham, Retties and Davidson and Robertson, they're the sort of main rural agents that I would think of when you're looking across Scotland and the north of England. Obviously register for Rightmove alerts. There's other portals on the market and Zoopla, but we find that Rightmove has the greatest coverage, and they're good at monitoring who advertises with them and that they're correctly registered companies and adhere to all the relevant legislation. Commercial listings also, I would say, don't define your property search to just looking and registering for plots for sale. Also register for land for sale, because that can include redevelopment sites and brownfield sites. We are obviously a very big commercial agency, and I sort of span the gap often between the sales when it's neither one thing or another. So it could be redundant agricultural sheds, which are now deemed brownfield. But you've also got commercial brownfield sites where there's no longer viable business there. You might have contamination with asbestos buildings and previous use that's contaminated the soil, and there's tax incentives to look at remediating that land, and there's assistance there. So I would say don't ignore those possible sites. There's a bit more work to be done, obviously, but there's also incentives to get that land cleaned up by the local authorities. Mailing list requirements, when you do go to these targeted agents and surveyors and sometimes solicitors as well in local areas, you need to let them know what your budget is so that you don't waste anybody's time. You know exactly what it's capped at. The minimum acreage, because if you're looking at predominantly a rural site, are you wanting a rural business to accompany that? And what land use do you require it for? So if it's equestrian, you'll obviously know what your minimum acreage is. You'll be looking to see if it's got planning and if services are in place. And I know that Fraser's going to go into a bit more detail on that a bit later on. We do a proactive search for landowner for a number of different outcomes. So for commercial use, for farming, and for the whisky business, for bonded warehouses, but also for plot searches. So you can register with us for free, and that adds you to our mailing list, and you'll be sent property alerts as and when they meet your requirements. But we can go a step further, and there's details of this on the HebHomes website. We do a very targeted approach to the rural surveyors that we know are active in the area, solicitors and planners as well that we know are working for clients in the area. And it really gives us an audience before it reaches an open market, which can be a preferred route, perhaps for you if you don't want to be in a competing situation. And we can approach those individuals and sometimes the landowners as well. DM Hall has a legal search department, so we can trace ownership of land as well if you've specifically got a site in mind that you perhaps want to be explored in more detail. I think we're ready to go on to the next slide.
Yeah. I think that a lot of our clients find the biggest hurdle initially is finding land, and we have people that have been looking for land for years. So I think knowing that there's people like DM Hall, our affiliates that can really help you with that option. And if you are struggling, but you know exactly where you want to build, your budget, and all the things that Jennifer's gone through, then they can really help you and target potentially plots that are off market. And find that dream plot for you. So
Yeah.
It's good to know you got that support there.
And your clients might have seen a site that's just maybe too big for them, but it matched every other requirement. Well, we can give them advice about splitting that for an onward sale. So perhaps they can carve out the plot that works for them, and we can help with the disposal of the remainder. So hopefully that's another thing to consider.
Well, just to add to that, Jennifer, we did have a client in the past who was looking to buy a dilapidated house down in the borders. And it was just going to be too expensive to renovate or to take it down and rebuild. But we noticed that the shape of the land lent itself to actually dividing it in two. So what happened was they bought the plots, they bought the old house, and then they divided the plot in two. We obtained planning permission for the two plots, and then they sold the second plot, which was the old house, for more money than they paid for the original plot.
It's a really good way of financing the build. Yeah, if you can get in and put the road in, service the sites, and then you can enjoy the uplift thereafter if you've not been tied into a clawback agreement by the vendor. But yeah, it's a really good way of financing a build.
Great.
So I was going to run through just general outline of process of offering on a plot. Obviously, you'll get independent advice from your solicitor and accountants. But once you've appointed a conveyancing solicitor to act for you, and you need to do that before, obviously, an offer can be submitted, they need to do their own due diligence for anti-money laundering. So they will expect you to provide photographic identification that is valid and proof of address and proof of funds. So your proof of address is generally a utility bill dated within 3 months, and proof of funds is either bank statement, or a proof of a loan, and the date of that loan is quite important from our perspective as agents, because it needs to have a validity of about 2 months, or we'd want it to be refreshed and reviewed. Your solicitor should note interest on your behalf in the first instance. Now, that's sort of logging a formal interest in the hope that the vendor doesn't proceed with another interested party in the interim. And if there are other notes of interest, it's very unusual that they don't proceed to a closing date, because that's the very best way of evidencing receiving the best offer on the day for the client. It's our preferred route of selling. It's the preferred route within Scotland. It's not the same south of the border. Has a closing date been set? It's unusual you're not given at least a week's notice of a closing date. And within that time, you're going to have to work out what your conditions are within your offer. So you're going to have to work out if it's subject to a sale, and an agent would expect you to give anticipated timescales, not for selling, but to be on the market if you're not already. If it's subject to finance, how far are you on with that process? Have you obtained an offer of loan? Are you releasing stocks and shares? Have you been given timescales for that? Is it subject to a survey? So if it's known asbestos on the site, are you wanting a survey carried out before you commit to this? So from a vendor's point of view, they're going to look at clean offers versus conditional offers and take a view. And often it's not, I'd say probably more often than not, it's not always the highest offer, it's the cleanest offer, in terms of is the money there and have I got complicated surveys that we don't know how long they're going to take and we don't know what the outcome is. And whenever you see a clause that's subject to a survey, you're going to expect further negotiation down the line, because a survey is going to tell you something that you didn't know, and you're going to obviously retract the offer and try and discount it. So it's never an attractive position for a vendor. So you need to consider not only the level of the offer, but the conditions within it. If it's subject to planning, so if you're looking at a site that, you know, isn't even allocated, it's not within the local development plan, it's greenbelt, your solicitor is going to be advising you not to proceed unless you have planning. It's a very high risk situation otherwise. But you might take a view on that. If the level of the offer you're comfortable with, then it's obviously a favourable position for the vendor. But if it is subject to planning, what you want is a long stop date. So each local authority clearly states out timescales for a response. So if it's a pre-app or if it's a detailed planning application, you should be able to specify if it's 12 weeks or if it's longer than that. And during that long stop date, and if the offer has been successfully accepted, they can't go and sell it to somebody else. And if you have a delay in planning, as long as you keep all the parties updated during that process, keep the communication flowing, and a good agent should be doing that, should be speaking to both solicitors and both vendor and seller to keep that line of communication going, because delays do happen. They're out with everybody's control, but if everybody's talking to each other, that keeps the sale transacting at a smooth level. Timescales for purchasing. If it's a clean offer and it's a site with detailed planning, so you've got evidence of all the required reports that are there, 6 to 8 weeks isn't unreasonable if the funds are in place. If it's subject to any sort of specialist lending, it can be slightly longer than that, depending at the time of year, because obviously we get a lot more seasonal activity, which delays a lender's time. And if you were unsuccessful and you wanted to know what it went for just for your own records, and it might help you with an onward bid for another site, ScotLIS is the land registry website that publishes sale prices, usually after 3 months. Sometimes it's a bit more instantaneous, but it's a good way of monitoring what a site went for, so you can consider that for your next purchase and next offer.
One thing we excuse me, we usually advise, so as Jennifer said, I guess it's all about assessing your risk before you actually offering a plot. So it's weighing up the risks against your chances of losing out in that plot. So the lowest risk approach is to place a conditional offer subject to getting the site surveyed and also getting planning approved. So it's making sure that you've got everything covered, because you might find that you get on site and there's some really challenging ground conditions. Drainage might be really difficult. There might be some things there that give you an opportunity to reassess the suitability of the plot, and you might decide after getting those surveys done that the site's not suitable and you can retract your offer essentially. Or with planning as well. So as Jennifer said, if you might have a plot that doesn't have any planning on it whatsoever, and it would be extremely risky to proceed without planning, but you might find that you've got a really good deal, and it's completely up to you if you want to take that risk, because you're getting a plot for a really good price. But we do advise against that, because you don't know, you might be buying a plot that you just can't build on. So lowest risk is to make sure that you get all the site surveys done and planning in place before you actually complete an offer.
We've got a small holding on the market, sorry, just on the back of that, which goes to closing next Tuesday. It's outside of Falkirk. It has a farmhouse on it, requires modernisation, but it's structurally okay. And there's a number of outbuildings, and there's hope value in those outbuildings because they're permitted development rights on redundant agricultural buildings. But our client is not minded, nor has the ambitions to pursue planning and lot it and take it to the market, which would have been the best return. Instead, they proceeded to the open market with a clawback provision. So be very, very careful when you look at these agreements. This means the vendor holds a security over the site, and it's triggered by a buyer obtaining planning permission. And these agreements can run, I've known them up to 50 years, but generally they're probably between 20 and 30. And that uplift value between agricultural land or amenity land to a plot value is agreed by chartered surveyors representing both parties, and often it's up to 50% difference. So it's another thing to look at when you see clawback clause. It kind of hints there's hope value there long term on a site.
Where would you find that, Jennifer?
It should be within the particulars. So it's just what I'm saying, don't ignore these brownfield sites. If clawback clause is referred to in a particulars, it generally means there's hope value on that site that's been identified.
Okay.
It'd be very rare for it to be put into, a greenfield site where there's no prospects of development. It'd be very unusual for a clawback agreement to be considered. There's a cost for entering into a clawback agreement for both vendor and seller, and it can be difficult for an onward sale if you hold it, if somebody needs a loan to buy the site, because a lender doesn't like, obviously, someone else has a security over it, but it's a good indicator that there's potential on that site.
Okay. Ali, did you want to add anything to that slide?
Oh no, I think that's all covered for the moment, Fraser.
Okay.
Okay,
Ali,
I think I'll take this on, understanding where you are building. I mean, one thing that some people actually don't really consider is defining where they actually want to live. So people come to me and I say, where are you looking for a plot? And they say, well, all over Britain. And it doesn't really help when they say that. So you've really got to narrow it down. If you're moving to Scotland or you're wanting to move up to the Highlands, whereabout do you want to live in the Highlands? And then once you've decided the area, whether it's Skye or Westeros or further north, what sort of community do you want to stay in? I mean, I would say it's best to actually be part of a community. Some people say, I want to be out in the sticks in the middle of nowhere, but that's fine until you get ill or you need to buy a pint of milk, you need to get to the doctors, you've no local pub. So ask my brother about that, that's what he's done. But you've really got to think about the sort of life that you want to live. Are you able to walk to the pub? There's a lot of these areas, there's no taxis available at all. So are you able to walk to the pub? Can you walk to the shop? Are you going to have neighbours that you can chat to, become friends with? Or are all the surrounding houses going to be holiday homes? So these things are really important. So narrow down the area where you want to live. Of course, you want to get a best view. If you buy a site in the west coast of Scotland and you don't have a great view, you've probably done something wrong, because it's difficult not to get a good view. And the good view is crucial. I mean, it adds massive value to your property. It will add to the price of the land, but it also adds huge enjoyment to your house. If you can just sit there looking at the storms rolling by through the big HebHomes windows, you don't really care about the weather anymore. In a more traditional house, you get tiny wee windows and it'll be dark and horrible and miserable and cold, but not with the HebHomes. So grab that view, make the most of it, but also try and be in a community. Planning constraints in the Highlands, we're finding that with HebHomes in particular, compared to when I started architecture, it used to be that the planners would say we want a white house with a slate coloured roof with windows of vertical emphasis. So they were describing an old Hebridean white house or Highland white house, but they weren't defining the form or the scale. So you ended up with these horrendous kit houses with white walls, windows with vertical emphasis, and 42-degree pitch roofs, and they were just monstrosities. But they're much more progressive now, so the planning constraints tend to be quite limited. They want a nice form, they want it to sit into the landscape, and that's why our houses, which are narrow, can slot into the topography quite easily. In other parts of the country, you go over to Morrisshire and Aberdeen, you'll have planners who say we want you to use granite, and they don't really consider cost. In Wales, they always ask for Welsh slate in the roof. In England, they can ask you for anything. They tend to want to restrict the ridge height for some reason, which means that the upstairs can't be used. But it is important to understand those planning constraints in terms of what the what the building looks like. In terms of planning constraints for where you can build and what you can build, as previously mentioned by Jennifer and Fraser, you don't really want to be going for a plot without planning permission. But what you'll find is that if you're building in the crofting communities, the crofting townships, there's a random settlement pattern, which means you can build within fields, within crofts, like halfway up a hill. And you've got that random settlement pattern where you can have a bit more privacy, where you can have a bit more land around you. In most parts of the UK, the policies really, they want you to use infill sites, they want you to be part of a grouping of houses, they want you to be within an existing settlement or village. And it's very difficult you can't say, I want to build in the middle of that farmer's field. That's what they did in Ireland. And it sort of ruins the landscape. So you can't really do that. So I think someone mentioned in the chat there, can you knock down an old building? That's actually a very good way of getting planning permission, is finding an old building, which was a house. And if it's dilapidated, knocking it down and building, and then you can get something which is maybe in a more remote location that you're looking for. But otherwise, it's quite tricky. I remember this client came to us up in Isle of Skye. This was many years ago, and there was lots of sites available, and the average price for a site then was between £8,000 and £12,000. And she wanted the perfect site with her own beach, with access to the water. We pointed out 2 or 3 to her that were superb, but they were never quite good enough. I remember 10 years later, she turned up and she was looking at sites that were now like £80,000, and they were nowhere near the sea. And that's just because she missed her chance. So also be careful when you are looking for a site not to have too high expectations. It's really difficult to get sites with access to the shore, direct access. But you do, as I said previously, you do want to get a great view if you're in west coast of Scotland. Anywhere rural in the UK, you should be getting a nice view. Surrounding buildings, I mean, this is one thing which, the surrounding buildings in some parts of the country, the planners are going to want you to fit in. They're going to want the architecture to reflect the local vernacular. Now, what we find with HebHomes is that rather than saying, well, the surrounding buildings are all built with brick or with stone or with white render, what you can see is, like, we want our building to read as an outbuilding. So one of the agricultural buildings is not there to challenge the existing houses. It's there to just fit in, almost like, as I say, act as an outbuilding. And the planners are quite open to that. If you put that forward as an argument, you can get away with having a building with timber cladding, metal roofs. You don't have to go for the more expensive options of rendered block or stone, which can add and slate, which can add significantly to the costs. Has anything been built recently? I mean, I suppose, like, if I had someone who may actually be on this call today who was offered land by a landowner who had sold plots without planning previously, and she was offered a plot which was not right next to the previous buildings, but was out in the field. Now, if there's as I mentioned before, if there's a settlement pattern where houses have been getting permission within a certain area, that suggests that it's likely that you will get planning if it's following that settlement pattern. But the idea that you'll get planning in your perfect plot, like finding a field and approaching a farmer, him saying he's willing to sell and getting planning permission in the UK, it's almost impossible. It'd be really difficult. If it was that easy, the planners would all be multimillionaires like they are in Ireland, when they had a very lax planning policy back in the early 2000s. So anything being built recently, it suggests that there's good ground condition. It suggests that there's services available, but if it doesn't have planning permission, you have to be very careful. Now, I think moving on to NPF4, which our sister company Dualhis are finding is quite challenging with some applications. That's something that Jennifer, I'm sure, will know a lot about, and the difficulties it's causing.
Actually, from my perspective, it's made my life a bit easier because I'm obviously cover a huge area, so it's very difficult to dip in and out of local policy within each authority, well, historically, and now I've just got one reference point, because if everyone's going to put in a pre-application in the Clyde or in Orkney, they're going to get the same response. They're going to get the relevant policy from NPF4, and for me, it's quite a easy document. You don't have to be conversant in planning to really comprehend it. It's laid out spatial strategy in Scotland in pretty black and white terms, and it's a very easy document to navigate and read through. And I would advise it to anybody looking for a plot. That's your first port of call, and the relevant policy there is Greenbelt. I'm sure if you're looking for a rural site with coastal views, we're going to be delving into Greenbelt. And when I say Greenbelt, we're talking about countryside that's been allocated as such. It's not in a village settlement. It's not on the fringes of a village settlement. It's not in a rural hamlet. It really is the countryside. Brownfield sites are everywhere. Brownfield sites will be in the countryside, within cities, within urban areas. Vacant and derelict land and empty buildings, that's exactly what I was referencing in terms of this site in Falkirk. It's closing next week. So we've got a farmhouse needing considerable investment to bring it up to modern standards. We've got empty, redundant agricultural buildings. They are good ones to watch. Empty sheds because of permitted development rights. It's almost a bit of a green light in terms of the planning process on a redundant agricultural shed of a certain size. Those are good ones to watch. And vacant land, that's a really topical one at the moment. So if anyone's had an empty property in Scotland and had been hit with their 100% surcharge on council tax, it's pretty much the same process for empty land now. So rates were normally exempt on empty sites, and that's now been devolved, and each local authority is increasing their taxes on it. It's a way of bringing in revenue, and also it's a getting away of these brownfield sites and empty land sites that could be repurposed, brought back into use. And I think that will bring more parcels of land to the market. People don't like paying rates on something they're not using. So it'll be interesting to see what that brings to the market, but kind of watch this space in terms of these empty land pockets sitting on the fringes of villages. Local living in 20-minute neighbourhoods. So we always say, just as you've said, Alasdair, about what's going on in the area, they're only going to say yes to another house if you're really within 20 minutes of an employment and there's local transport. So it needs to be on a bus route, really. There's exceptions. Quality homes and rural homes are your accepting policies, and so have a good read through those. And those are really a green light for houses of particular architectural merit that are going to visually enhance an area. And also, if it's going to boost an area that needs the rural economy revived, they'll look at it. We are seeing a huge exodus of short-term lets because of the licensing scheme in Scotland. They want rural economies to be revived, and they want permanent housing. And there will be council tax hits for second homes throughout Scotland, and we're obviously seeing the impact of rising council tax in certain local authorities anyway. So if it's a second home, that's another thing to consider about sort of long-term costs where you are. It's SNP policy to try and drive out second homes and short-term lets and long-term lets, to be honest. They just want permanent communities.
Well, I think one of the challenges there is there's been a lot of property which is actually not good enough quality for the letting market. It sort of lets down the reputation of Scotland as a tourist destination, which should really. So this is because of Airbnb. It was very easy to let these properties. You make more money than letting long term. So previously, properties that were let for seasonal workers or for young people looking for a place to live just suddenly went onto Airbnb. And I think those are the properties that they're really trying to force out of the letting market with the short-term lets. There's still an opportunity, a huge opportunity now for properties which are going for the high quality end of the tourism market, because there's less available, they will actually become more expensive and more desirable. So it's not really working out the way the SNP envisaged. I don't think the Scottish Government, but it is going to have an impact. I can't see how it's going to help young people get properties, because people who've got money will just buy them up, and if they've got enough money to have a second home, they'll have enough money to pay double council tax, and they'll just keep it empty rather than renting it. So there's a lot of challenges still there, but yeah, there's also, you don't want to be living in a community where every house is a holiday home and there's no one around. It won't, well, unless that's what you want. I'd say most people would want to be in a community. Okay, plot considerations. We've touched on this before. I mean, this is something which is really important, and a lot of our clients from experience have made some quite bad mistakes in the past. I mean, the first thing to remember, and I think I should have mentioned this before when I was talking about where to live, is that where you choose to live in the country will have a huge impact on the cost of the house. If you choose to live on an island off an island, you can only get there in a barge or a helicopter. It's going to cost a lot of money to build your house. If you go up to the very northwest of Scotland, there's basically no contractors around there, so they've got to commute in and rent accommodation in order to build. That's going to add a lot to the cost of your house. You know, even building a place like Tyree, add 30% onto the cost of your build. So that's one thing to remember. If the more remote, the more expensive it will be to build your house. But likewise, when you choose a plot, you really got to think, how expensive is that particular plot going to be to build upon? So I remember a client buying a plot on the east coast of Harris quite cheaply, but it's the hardest rock, or amongst the hardest rock in the world, and I think it were £40,000-50,000 just to level a platform for the foundations. A long access drive can have a huge impact on the overall cost. Deep peat, we go back to, do you have a clean offer, or do you put down some conditions? I think as long as there's not a lot of interest in that particular plot, we would always advise put down some conditions. I mean, it could be, maybe it's not a condition, but you really want to find out, do you have 3 meters of peat to get rid of? Is there somewhere for that peat to go? Do you have very deep soil? Do you have extremely hard rock? Because again, that can be very, very expensive. If the site has got slope on it, any sort of significant slope on it, if it's soft rock, easy to take out, that's somewhere for that rock to go, that's not a problem. But it's hard rock, or if there's nowhere for that spoil to go, again, that can be extremely expensive. There's a mention there of visibility displays. I remember we had this client who bought this site. It's actually on our website. It's one of the houses that were built, and it ended up being very successful, and it had direct access to the loch, and because of that, the site was, I think, around about £200,000, and they'd already bought it when I went to have a look at it. But the visibility, it planning permission in principle, but the planning permission in principle, a condition was to sort out the visibility displays. A condition of the planning permission in principle was to look at the access. The access shown in the two-dimensional planning permission in principle drawing was going over the edge of a cliff. There was no access. There was no visibility displays. There actually wasn't any sewerage solution when we found the site, but they'd already touched it. They'd obviously been badly advised by their lawyer not to get these things sorted out. But it was actually to resolve this, we had to go to Edinburgh to the Church of Scotland, who owned the land, and they were the hardest negotiators we ever came across. Eventually, after about a year, they agreed that a tiny slice of the embankment of their lands, which they owned, could be cut away, so they could actually see if there was lorries coming at 60 miles an hour down the road towards their access. So it was eventually sorted out, but the point is that you do have to be very careful. I remember another site which had full planning. It had sewerage solution, full planning permission for the house, but it didn't have anywhere for the surface water to go. So that's something Fraser's going to talk about a bit later, but that's another potential problem. I think you want to talk, Jennifer, about the access.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a bugbear for me, because we quite often get approached by people to value their plots, and then you find out very quickly that they don't actually have access rights to it. So if they, for example, have a farm and the road to the farm is owned by a third party, and the solemn of the road is owned by a third party, but they have irredeemable heritable right of access for accessing their farm, that does not give them rights for intensification on that road to have several plots within the farm. So effectively, the third party owner of a road would have a ransom for development. There's a Stokes versus Cambridge example, which is quoted most frequently when these cases go to court, and it's a third of the development value that's owed to the person that owns the access. So it is very, very important when you are purchasing a plot that you are very clear on what your title issues are in terms of access, what your access rights are, and also access rights for servitudes, because those can often come obviously through the roads. Yeah, it's a bit of a bugbear, so always check.
Yeah, I've come across that a few times in the past. The ransom strips that the landowner, the state owner, will hold and they'll just ask, pay me £30,000 cash, and or else we're going to court. So you do have to be careful there. The other one, which is a problem that we come across before, is adopted standard. People selling off plots of land, and then I think it's once it gets the fifth or sixth road, it's fifth or sixth house. It does vary depending on council area, but then the council demand it's got to be adopted standards. I had a prospect a year or two ago who was looking at buying a bit of a plot of land to build a house, and they were well down the road of putting the offer in. And I looked through the planning condition, and they had to bring the entire community road up to adopted standard. It was like 2 or 3 miles of road. They had to tarmac, put in pavement, street lighting, various things. You know, you have to run a mile from that, unless everyone's going to share the cost, which they won't do. You have to avoid that. So it's another thing to look out for. And a good tip is, if you're looking at a bit of land, go on to download the planning approval and then feed it through ChatGPT and just ask it, give me a summary of this planning approval and point out any potential problems. I did this for someone recently. They thought I was a genius because they didn't know about ChatGPT, but they said, I'm looking to buying this plot of land in a croft, and I just put it through ChatGPT, and it pointed out somewhere in the planning response that the entire local crofting community was in dispute with the landowner as to who had rights, whether they had rights to sell this land or not. And then I got a response from the prospect saying, my lawyer never noticed this. Thank you very much, Alasdair. I'm absolutely furious and I'm about to phone them because they're about to buy the plot. But you know, it was ChatGPT you noticed, not me. But these are wee tips that can really, really help you when you're looking for a plot. Use AI just to check things out for you, save you a lot of time, and it will simplify the language for you as well. Sorry, it's my brother phoning. If you can't understand it.
Okay, thanks guys. I'll move on to the next one. So another thing this was mentioned briefly earlier is your drainage solutions. So the glamorous foul and surface water, what do you actually do with that? So we have had projects before that have come to us that have had real issues with drainage because there's been no solution. And this is one of the reasons that we do recommend that you get a lot of this resolved before you complete on the purchase of the plot. So that would be part of the condition, part of the site surveys that you get done. Even if they say there's access to a sewer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can put all of your water disposal into that, so your foul and surface water. So originally, you've got combined, there's 2 main different types of sewers in the UK. You've got a combined sewer, which historically you could put foul and surface water into, and you've also got separate foul and surface water sewers, which would be in 2 different pipes. So in combined sewers, historically, you could put your surface water in there. So that's all the water that comes off the roof, off any hard standings, you know, down your gutters and downpipes. They've recently, well, not recently, probably in the last kind of 5-10 years, they've changed it so that you can't put your surface water into the combined sewer just because it completely overwhelms the system. So you'll find if there's any surges, if there's any heavy rainfall, it would completely overwhelm the sewer network. So generally, it's not necessarily impossible, but you'd have to speak to the water supplier, the drain supplier. But generally, 9 out of 10 times you won't be able to connect. So that means you need to look at different options. So if you've got a land with percolation, so this is all part of the site investigation process, where you basically dig a pit and then you pour water in it, and you time how long it takes for that water to soak away. So if you've got land that's suitable for that, usually it's kind of gravelly, sandy land that allows the water to soak away, then that's great because you can deal with all of your drainage needs within the site. If you've got land that's got clay or is very impermeable and it takes a long time for that water to drain away, then it's probably not suitable for a soak away. So the percolation test is one of the main tests you would get done right at the start of the process. If it's usually, if there's a sewer nearby, usually it's the preference to connect into the sewer. But if that's impractical, if the sewer is over someone else's land or far away and difficult to get to, then SEPA will consider a private a private system. So SEPA is that's the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. They basically are there to sign off and authorise any private foul water drainage systems. So that's usually the best and most convenient and cost-effective system is a septic tank and a soakaway. So you'll see septic tanks all across the countryside. It's very, very common. But the septic tank needs to be paired with a soakaway, so that means that you deal with all the discharge from the septic tank, and that's fairly clean water, but you can't connect that directly into a watercourse, which you will see a lot of properties from the 60s and 70s. They will have a septic tank just connected straight to the coastal waters or maybe a river. But SEPA has been brought in to stop that happening, and it just protects our environment and animal habitats and things. So if there's not sufficient percolation in the site and you can't get a soakaway and there's also no sewer for your foul and surface water, then there's another option, which is a biological treatment tank, which is a much more active treatment. It's very similar to a septic tank where it sits under the ground, but it's wired in, so it needs an electrical input, and it basically helps to digest everything within the tank, and then the outflow from that tank is of a much higher quality, and generally you can discharge that directly to a watercourse or the coast. If there's so there might be a few issues here if you don't have a watercourse running through your plot that isn't constantly running, or you don't have access to the coast and you need to go over neighbours' land, then that's a consideration. So you'd need to get agreement, a legal agreement with your neighbour to take a pipe through their land, and they're not obliged to give you that. So that's why it's really worthwhile looking at this before you completing the purchase. And likewise, if to get to the coast or any kind of watercourse, you need agreement if it's not within your land. If you're going to a shellfish protected area, so in Scotland there's a few like Loch Fyne, there may need to be secondary treatment if you are discharging to it. So if you use biological treatment tank, you might need a secondary filter, so like a reed filter or something to just increase the quality of that discharge before it goes to the watercourse. With your private systems, you will need some sort of maintenance. So usually it's an annual maintenance service, and generally that will be a company that comes in and desludges the tank and just makes sure it's all in good working order. So you do need to make sure that the tank is accessible to a tanker. So it's in quite an easy place to maintain. And it's obviously just a small additional cost towards your annual maintenance bill. And I think that's most of the things.
I'll probably just add, just in terms of SEPA, if you're buying a plot and they're saying you've got access to a shared septic tank with their property next door, it was a legal obligation to have that tank registered by law, and you can get a copy of that registration via SEPA on request. And if you've bought it and you don't have it, you need to get it, and it's about, I think, £150 plus VAT to get it through SEPA. And it was just a way of them putting X on the map and marking all these outlets. And my experience of the more recent sort of planning applications is wherever possible, they're trying to get you to connect into the mains and avoid private drainage if it's feasible and if it can be done. And that's fair enough, but it is obviously very expensive, especially if we're talking about third-party way leaves over third-party land. So yeah, you really do need to do your homework on all utility connections, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that I can just add, I remember a house on the Isle of Skye where we recommended to the buyer, to our client, that they actually undertook new percolation tests and not to rely on the percolation tests which were provided by the seller. And they didn't listen to us, and the sewage system was designed on the basis of the percolation test provided by the seller. And he'd been in his house about a year when his toilet backed up. Well, I think it was actually friends of his were staying, the toilet backed up, so it was a complete mess. And basically there was no percolation in the land at all. It was all lies. And we managed to sort it out, but you had no way, there was no watercourse you could get access to. So we managed to wangle it using some former SEPA officials to get having to put in 2 treatment tanks, and then getting the effluents put into the roadside ditch, which technically shouldn't really have done. But he was in a position where he could have had a house without a toilet. So that's why you've just got to be careful. And it's a £400,000 house, probably a £1 million house now if you was to build it. So you do have to be quite careful with what the sellers are telling you. So that's why we always recommend like double check. Unless it's connection into main sewerage, it's fine. But if you're don't rely on their results for percolation tests.
Yeah, I mean, any seller that's instructed the survey has done it to obtain planning. So every survey they've put forward is in a favourable position. So yeah, I would always be getting my own independent advice.
Yeah, it's a relatively low cost part of the process. You want to make sure you're doing everything by the book and protecting yourself. And that's why we've got our planning and warrant service for people in Scotland. If you're in England, Ireland, Wales, then I would recommend that you use an agent to help organise all of these surveys. So usually they'll have contacts to help you organise them. You can use on our website, we've got our planning warrant service section, which breaks down the kind of likely surveys that you'll need to get through planning and building warrant and building control. And to actually get started on site. So I don't want to, we've gone through a lot of topics today that might sound scary, but you just need to get the right people in place to lead you through that process. So with our planning and warrant service, that we always do these surveys at the very start of the process to make sure that the land is buildable. It helps us flag up any issues with the land, and if there are issues, we can get them resolved, or as we mentioned, you could look elsewhere, so you could always pull out if anything's insurmountable. Generally it's not. Generally there is a solution to everything, but we're there to help work through that and find the solution for your site. So here in this slide, it's showing you a bit of a breakdown of the likely surveys that you'll require. And these are always done at the start of the project, and they're required. It doesn't matter what you build on the site. You'll need it for any sort of building. So even if you're getting them done without owning the site, you obviously just need to let the owner of the site know that you're conducting these surveys. But you can always get started in the process. So generally, the first thing we'll do is we'll send out a few consultants to do your ground conditions report, which is the digs and trial pits around about where the house is going to be built. And it really shows us what the makeup of the ground is, and that helps the engineers design their foundations. So Ali mentioned before, if you've got a site with really deep peat or really hard rock, all those kind of things might increase the value of the cost of the foundations, for example. So it's really good to highlight that early, so that we know if there's going to be any cost increases to the actual build. They'll also do the topographic survey, so you'll be able to tell if the site's sloping or flat. But the topographic survey, it's kind of like an OS map, so it shows you the levels of the ground and if there's any rocky features and highlights any telegraph poles or anything that we need to be aware of. And that allows us to position the house as accurately as possible to keep the cost as low as possible. So generally, if you've got a sloping site, our longhouses are really well suited to that because they've got a really, really narrow, long footprint. And if you align that with the contours, it means that you've got minimal cut and fill required. Whereas if you've got one of our larger houses, like one of our steadings, it's got a much wider footprint, so they're much better suited to flat sites. It's not impossible to build them on slightly sloping sites, but you will have more costs when it comes to things like retaining walls, to make sure that you've got a flat base to build on. We'll also do the drainage report at the start, so that includes the percolation test to make sure that we can get a soakaway within the land. Some of these things might have been done, but as Jennifer and Ali both said, they might not be complete, so that we just need to scrutinise them. So quite often I'll send the reports that you have on the land to our consultants to check if it's suitable and they can work with them. So just bear that in mind. We can always review what you have. The visibility displays, that's something Ali was talking about earlier. So that's just if you're forming a new access off a public road, you need to achieve visibility up and down the road to make sure that you can see oncoming cars. So that visibility display increases drastically if you go from a 30-mile-an-hour road up to a 60-mile-an-hour road, and that display might affect neighbouring land and maintenance. So there might need to be some kind of proviso in there to for your neighbours to cut back hedges or to maintain your splays, so you can make sure that you can safely exit and enter your new access road. So that's all taken up within the topographic survey, to make sure that you can actually see up and down the roads, and that does help identify exactly where your access track will go. And then once we've got all that information, your road access design and cut and fill analysis for the sloping sites. So these are all things that are included as standard within our service. If you have anything that's already been done, then we just reduce our service accordingly. And as I say, your agent, if you're elsewhere outside of Scotland, will be able to advise on any additional surveys. So there's a few other ones that may be required. Just depends on where your site is. So flood risk assessment might be required if you're within a flood risk zone. So there's maps online that you can see where you are. Survey of existing buildings. If you've got an existing building, then you may want to get that surveyed or get a conditions report done. Asbestos as well, environmental surveys, tree surveys, private. So if private water supply design might be required if you don't have access to mains water. I'll go into that a wee bit more in the next slides. Contamination land report if there's been any previous activities on site that have caused any contamination from chemicals, so like farming activities or anything that might have leaked anything into the soil. You can always check with your local planning office as well, see if there's any recommendation of what additional surveys would be required. But generally, on the majority of our sites, it's those top 5 things that we'd be looking at, and then there may be some add-ons. So connecting to services, this is one you would really want to think about before you complete on the purchase as well. So connecting to electricity, mains water, and potentially sewer. They can be very expensive or they can be quite straightforward. It really depends on your site. So electricity, you might you're best talking to your local electrical and water boards to get a rough cost estimate of how much it costs to actually connect to their systems. Even if there's electrical cables nearby, you might find it's actually quite expensive to connect to them because you need to add a transformer near the house, or you need to go quite far to find a transformer. As well as if you want to bury the cables within your land, it can be quite expensive to get that the trench dug and get that wire buried. But it can be, if you're going to have a post right in front of your view, then it's worthwhile considering if it's going to interrupt that view. Mains water, you want to make sure you can do private systems, so you can get a borehole or a spring if you need to, but the most cost-effective way is to get connected to your mains water. So you can again do a pre-development inquiry with your water board to check that there's capacity in the system and to see where the likely connection point is, and they can also give you indicative costs for connecting. If you're doing a borehole, there's a lot of uncertainty there because you're not guaranteed to actually find water. So there'll be companies out there that will help you try and identify where the water is and the likely areas of water, but they can't guarantee it until they've actually drilled down. So you might find that they dig the borehole and they haven't actually found water. Same with springs, but springs are a little bit more, you just need to test the water. Generally with both of those systems, you will need filtration, so that's an added cost. So one thing to consider. Connecting to sewer as well. So that's, if you've got a sewer nearby, that is usually SEPA's preference rather than a septic tank. So if you're able to connect, then that's beneficial and usually a little bit cheaper than septic tanks. But that's only if it's really nearby. So you can do a kind of an early stage inquiry with them to see where the connection point would be. Also just broadband and phone availability. It's good just to know that you can still be connected, so that you're not completely isolated in your new home, and also just mobile signal. So all these little things do make a difference to the enjoyment of your home. Do you guys want to add anything else to that?
Well, I think we've got a few questions we've got to answer, Fraser.
Yeah, we're probably getting on with time, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go through them, Ali?
Okay. Right, what have I done with them? Okay, I know there's a few for Jennifer. I'm just going to go back up the top. Is the webinar at 12:30 today? Yes, it was. Right, okay. Is the service by Jennifer also available in the south of England?
Not at this time, and our legal search is only in Scotland at the moment, but we have obviously good connections, so we can make introductions to people in relevant areas. So don't worry about getting in touch with us, and we'll point in the right direction.
Yeah,
I'll
because
send
yeah.
After this webinar, I'll send a follow-up email with our details, so who to get in touch with for what. So I'll send everyone Jennifer's details if they want to go ahead with the proactive land search or be added to the mailing list. And also, if you've got, you can direct people to the relevant parties in England.
Okay, next question.
Next one I think was me. Guernsey for proactive. Again, we're not active in Guernsey, but we will make introductions to chartered surveyors there that can assist. And I think it's always best to have somebody on the ground who will have connections to those landowners.
The next question, I think this is quite an important one. How simple is it to find properties that are cheaper to demolish than renovate and build on the foundations? Well, firstly, I would say that there's lots of properties out there that look, habitable, and if people have been living in them, especially these old white houses, the wee granny's been living in them, moved into a care home, and you'll be paying 20% VAT to renovate it. If they've not been in it for 2 years, it drops to 5% if it's been empty for 2 years. But basically those houses, all of these houses will have to be taken back to the bare walls with the earthen floors dug out. And you're effectively buying a site, and it'll be more expensive to renovate, even without VAT, than to build a new house. So the sort of old house you should buy in order to knock down, unless you're quite wealthy, to knock down and rebuild, is actually something that's as dilapidated as possible, that looks a complete and utter mess, that's not been sold for a lot of money, because it'll be for a house which is in better condition, to bring it up to modern standards, it will cost even more than to knock down that old dilapidated house, and you'll be paying a lot more for it. Generally, it's up to the engineer. Building off old foundations, the pop-ups are in the wrong places, the foundations are in, it's in poor quality, and an engineer will just say no, and a builder will just say no, let's just dig it out and do new foundations. So I wouldn't even consider that building off, and it'll also, it might not fit, it constrains the size of your house, so it's not something I would really take into account. You're not really going to save any money. It might actually cost you more money. Okay, do you want to take the next question? Where permission to rebuild is not a problem? Are there any tips you might share about demolishing an existing poor quality house? Well, I think we just covered that, to be honest.
Yeah, you need a warrant, obviously, to demolish something, so it's a planning process.
Yeah, and there's a dilapidation report. I mean, if you just go and knock a house down and there's asbestos in it and you've not had the proper survey done and it's not been taken apart and disposed of correctly and legally, you will be held criminally responsible personally, and you could go to prison. So you have to be quite careful. I don't want to scare anyone. But do you also offer building in Ireland? I mean, we do. We've got a partner in Ireland where we can do SIP houses, and I think we've got a number of projects over there. We've got 1 or 2 on site now. And I think the big problem we found in Ireland is finding contractors. A lot of Irish would say to us, can you fly people over from Britain? But because of Brexit, that's actually problematic. And so that's why we use Irish suppliers to supply and erect in Ireland. But finding contractors over there is quite tricky. So we do know architects who can help you through that process, and we'll have good contacts. But yeah, I think everyone's been sucked into overheated Dublin. That's where all the money is, and that's where the tradesmen are heading, and that's the problem. Good Wi-Fi in the Highlands. There is some good Wi-Fi in some part of the Highlands. My house doesn't have it, but the house next door does. It's quite annoying, but yeah, it is possible. Fraser, do you want to take it on from here? I think, have you been answering some of the questions already, Fraser?
I can't actually see the questions, so I'll need you to take the lead on these, Ali.
Okay. I think other people have been answering the questions.
Well, I think I like James's question. Is it easier to get planning permission for an off-grid build? I would say no.
Well, I would say that off-grid is something people ask for. The larger the house, the more difficult it is, the more expensive it is. For a smaller house, off-grid is quite straightforward. But what you have to realise about the Highlands of Scotland in particular, and Scotland in general, is that most of the electricity which is generated is green. So if there's green if the local electricity connection is green energy and it's available, why do it off-grid? You know, you're just wasting resources. It just doesn't make sense. But if you are in an island like Egg or another place that's very remote, it can be done off-grid. I mean, it can be designed by our services engineer in conjunction with ourselves. But as I say, it can be very expensive if it's a larger building to make it off-grid. But the technology is moving forward. We've got an off-grid house, I think, on the island of Col. I think it was either Col or Colonsay. And the client has just bought an electric car, which he plugs into the house. That's the battery for his house when he's in his house. And obviously when he's out of his house, when he's in his car, his house doesn't need the battery. So I think he was trying to save a bit of money. It was quite clever. So yeah, it can be done. The EA in England have used computer modelling back in 2007 to show JFlow data. The outcome of this is the parcel of land we have is CAT 2 and 3. Given its location, we think the EA are wrong. Can you offer advice? That's one for you, Jennifer. Do you know about English planning policy?
No, I would really defer to a planner. Thank Claire. Not a planner. I'm a surveyor.
Yeah, I think that's. I would just stick that. I'm just going to stick that question into ChatGPT and get an answer for you. But
I can share all the current categories in Scotland, but probably not England off the top of my head. And I'd say absolutely everything's up for a conversation with an assessor if you're querying it.
Yeah, I mean, planning. One of the reasons we don't do the planning warrant service in England when we used to is just because planning in England is a complete nightmare, and we just didn't want to get involved in it anymore because it just seems so difficult, and all the neighbours seem to be against the applicant for some reason everywhere. But to answer your question, when dealing with classifications or assessments provided by environmental authorities such as the Environment Agency, especially concerning flood risk categories based on computer modelling and data like JFlow, it's essential to approach the situation methodically. If you believe the classification of your parcel of land as category 2 and 3, which typically refers to flood risk zones, with category 3 often indicating a high probability of flooding, is incorrect due to its locations or other factors, here are several steps you consider. It's now given me 10 steps, so I'm not going to read them out, but put your question into ChatGPT and tell it to be a planning expert and it will give you a fantastic response. Yeah. Have a possible site in mind 50 metres long, but only 9 metres wide. Is the width an issue? Width can be an issue. So you're only leaving, say, a 6 metre wide house, you're leaving 1.5 metres on either side. So it's going to be very difficult to get around that house in terms of buildability. So you need to use a crane from one side. I mean, it can be done, but it can be tricky. If you're within a certain distance of neighbours' property, new building regulations kick in. So you won't be able to use timber, you won't be able to have windows, or only a limited size of windows. So yeah, it's really to do with buildability. If you can get planning, that's fine, but sites like that tend to lend themselves better to bespoke architecture. So an architects take control of these designs, specifically how to build on that site. But slotting in even a 6 metre wide HEB home is possible, but it could be quite tricky in terms of getting it built. If we had a pot of money to use in say 10 years to purchase house kits, would the funds go further purchasing that than bricks and mortar home, lower rise in the cost of kit versus the housing market? Well, I think purchasing bricks and mortar at the moment, I wrote a blog about this that you can read on the website. It's actually a big risk because these houses are really not fit for purpose. You know, going forward,
thinking about retrofit for energy efficiency as well, which is a massive topical issue, and it's an issue for lenders going forward. Yeah. So
it's very, very expensive. I mean, the value of old housing stock going forward is going to go down. If you invest, it will cost you more money. You invest in a new house which is future-proofed. Those houses are going to be few and far between. Their value is going to go up and up and up. So I think, yeah, you know, to answer the question, I think it would make sense to purchase a kit now than to invest in. I mean, it's difficult to say, but if you purchase a kit now, the building regulations will be completely different in 10 years. So it's probably a big risk. Okay, what's the best source to search for land in Wester Ross? That's one for you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'd go straight to Rightmove probably, and then see who comes up, and then you want to register them and then monitor the frequency of their alerts, because those that are most active will be the most reliable.
And I would add, we've got a new webpage on our website where we've got clients who've got planning permission for HebHomes, but they're not building them. And you can go in there and you get a link to the sellers, and you can buy directly from them. In fact, we've got one house which is featured on the website, which is an AGH 501 up in Wester Roston, looking over Loch Torridon, next to the amazing Torridon Hotel. So that client contacted me last week to say he's selling it. He's got a number of holiday homes. I think he's just taken on too much. He wants to build another Dolchus dream home for himself. But if anyone wants a HebHomes and they want a 2-bedroom HebHome, which could also be an amazing escape or a letting unit, that is available to buy. I've got no idea how much he's charging for it, but it did cost him about £400,000. No, I think overall to build, I'm not sure, but it is a great opportunity.
Well, we can list that on the website once it's available. We can send that round.
But it is a news story on the website at the moment. So just contact Lindsay at hebhomes.com and she'll put you in touch with the seller. There's a guy called Alasdair, who may be on this call, I don't know. But it's a great opportunity if you want to almost immediately have a HebHomes rather than going through the process of buying land and actually building the house.
Well, we've run on a wee bit there. Are there any questions you want to answer in addition to that, Ali?
Well, I think that's about it. I mean,
Right.
Do you have any experience with off-grid water, sewage? I think that's all been covered, those questions. So I think that's about it, Fraser.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks for your contributions, Ali and Jennifer. Much appreciated. I hope everyone's found that quite informative. We've covered a lot of topics, and hopefully it's not been too daunting, because we are there to help you through that process, and you just need to get the right people on your side to help take you through the process of bidding on the plot, purchasing it, and then also getting it surveyed and getting all your permissions in place. So hopefully today's given you a little bit more background and all the things that you need to think about whilst you're buying a plot. So as Ali says, we've got a part of our website has a few plot listings on it, so you can always keep an eye there, and we'll keep that updated for active plots that are up for sale. If you do have a plot that you'd like to sell, you can always let us know, and we can list that for you. But yeah, if you found a plot that you've identified and you're quite keen to proceed, then do get in touch. We are quite busy at this time of year, so we do just ask for people to be quite serious about proceeding before getting in touch. But we'd be glad to speak to you and hopefully give you a bit of advice and get you set up as clients if you're looking to proceed with a process. So you can I'll send an email round after this with Jennifer's details, and you can always respond to me with any queries that you have, or if you'd like to get a meeting set up, let me know. But we'll wrap things up there. Thank you very much, Ali and Jennifer, and I hope you all enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Fraser.